Major Taylor's life had a profound impact on the sport, and it also had a profound impact on society during that time. So I want to just talk for 5-10 minutes before I start showing the slides, because I think that for your benefit there are certain things that need to be repeated or need to be emphasized about the period. It's far enough away to be unfamiliar, but yet it's close enough still to be very familiar in many ways. And I just wanted to read a brief passage from the book in order to give a little bit of background history and to get this out of the way, because I think that it's creating a solid context for the slides and for thinking about Major Taylor will be very much to your benefit. So I'm just going to read a couple of paragraphs from the book. While in some ways prospects for black people seem to be improving after the Civil War, in educational opportunities, for example, and in ownership of property, in other respects their status, north and south, actually deteriorated. Southern opinion was becoming more extreme than ever, and white northerners were becoming increasingly indifferent and even hostile toward Negroes. During the 1880s and 1890s, many of the rights won by blacks during Reconstruction were attacked and reversed by Jim Crow laws. Blacks were denied the vote in many areas of the South by the introduction of educational or other requirements designed to exclude them. Segregation in trains, streetcars, restaurants, in fact, in any public place where the two races were likely to meet, became more and more general across the South and increased in the North. This new legal codification of white supremacy was an attempt by the white power structure in the South to turn back the clock and prevent blacks from challenging white control. The rise in discrimination went unchecked by the failure of the Supreme Court to rule in favor of the civil rights of blacks in a series of test cases, culminating in the notorious case of Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, which held that, quote, separate but equal facilities did not violate the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. So I think that's enough hard history, just as a reminder. The other thing I'd like to just introduce briefly is to remind you of, let me say first that essentially Major Taylor's life is, his dates are 1878 to 1932. His cycling career spans 1892 to about 1910. And I just want to preface briefly with what many of you already know, a couple of words about history of cycling up to the beginning of Major Taylor's career. Of course, we have a brief bone shaker period, 1868 to 1869. Then we have the emergence of the high wheeler, the penny farthing, in 1870s up into the 1880s. A lot of high wheel racing right across the country. Tracks are built, high wheel racing is pulling in the crowds. Then we have the emergence of the safety bicycle. The bicycle as we know it today, more or less, comes in 1885. Beginning of pneumatic tyre, 1890. Pneumatic tyre sweeps the board, early 90s, so that by 1892 there is not hardly a bicycle on the road with a solid tyre. Everything is pneumatic. And that's when racing really takes off. Major Taylor had a very good, his life was very well timed as far as the history of bicycle technology. He comes up into the sport as a young lad. He learns to ride the high wheel bicycle. He probably rode a solid tyre bicycle, but as soon as he starts racing seriously, boom, 1892, 1893, he's on a pneumatic tyre bicycle. And of course, that's an explosion. There's a bicycle boom in the mid-90s. The bicycle becomes an everyday fact of life for the whole population, Europe and America. And that gives a little bit of background to it. It situates Major Taylor in the development of bicycle technology. Okay, so why me to have done this work and to have become involved with Major Taylor? It's a bit of a mystery in some ways, but clear in other ways. In the mid-70s, I wrote a book on the history of bicycle technology that probably some of you have seen this natty yellow cover. And this book is still around 35 years later. And when I came to California first, 1972, and then I wrote that book, but I was in a bookshop in Oakland one day, and I found a book that changed things a little bit, which is the autobiography of Major Taylor, the fastest bicycle rider in the world. This is the first copy that I found, and I read it, and I thought, interesting story. I did some little bit of research. I got some newspaper clippings, including a newspaper clipping that said Major Taylor's daughter, Sydney Taylor Brown, is still living and had been interviewed by a newspaper somewhere on the East Coast. So I called information, and I found that she was in Pittsburgh. Picked up the phone. There were 2 ST Browns in the phone book, and the first one I called was Sydney. Picked up the phone, and I hear this sprightly voice saying, "Are you connected with Major Taylor?" "Oh yes, I'm daughter. You know, what do you want to know? Fire away with questions." And I still have the first letter that I got from Sydney, which is here, June 7th, 1975. "Yes, I'm Major's daughter, retired social worker. Fire away with questions." Telephone number. "I am repeatedly being frustrated and angered because credits due to Dad are usually missing in the many recently published books on cycling. He was the first black world champion of any species, and as such deserves to be in sport's world of fame. Even Guinness ignores his records." And then she goes down, "His gold medal serves proof that he was world champion for qualified years." And then she runs down a list of the championships. So anyway, so that was the beginning of my contact with her. I went to Pittsburgh several times. I interviewed her. I ran hours of tape with her. She opened up all the memorabilia, which now, well, it's a long story and I can't really get into now, the story of the memorabilia, but all the scrapbooks and the photographs, I was able to copy. Everything you see here and you will see on the screen is basically because Sydney opened up her archive to me.